Okay, I have no idea what consciousness is. It doesn't seem to connect to any intuitive understanding that I have. Uh, I'm not convinced that it exists, even, and I'm not sure of the utility of the term. It seems to have very fuzzy boundaries. I don't know where consciousness ends and life begins, or complex systems end and consciousness begins. These things all seem very muddled together, and like there's not much difference between a lot of these different categorizations. So it's my aim with this project to elucidate, largely for myself, an intuitive awareness or understanding of consciousness. And I want to make that part clear. I'm aiming for an intuitive awareness, not necessarily a fully like written out definition, because I think definitions can go awry in a lot of ways. I really want to be able to look at something or look at a system or look at an animal and have some way to judge vaguely if they have consciousness as a property or act in a conscious way or whatever that might be. Before we jump into that though, I want to give a rundown on what I call the cosmic trap of definitions. This is just a language game. It's easy to get lost in the trees and not be able to see the forest. And frankly, any definition, no matter how good it is, will either be overly convoluted and not useful at that point, or will leave some edge cases that it doesn't really account for. And that's fine. That's what a definition should do. But when you're trying to explore the internals of something by creating a definition of that thing, that gets really messy. That's a hard line to walk, in my opinion. So a strict definition is not what I'm looking for. I really want a vague understanding of some of the properties of things that we agree are conscious, that we can point to and say, that seems like an element of consciousness to me. I think the best example of a definition game is the example of defining a chair. And this is a little bit of a silly example, but a very easy definition you could give for a chair on first pass would be something with a back and 4 legs that you sit on. On the face of it, it seems like this definition leaves something to be desired, but isn't entirely incorrect. However, as soon as you start getting into definition games, you have also defined a horse as a chair, seeing as it has 4 legs and a back. And obviously that's not a chair. I don't think anyone would say that a horse is a chair, right? And this is the same reason that you can't say that a man is a featherless biped, because then some bozo will come along and hold up a chicken with all its feathers plucked out, right? However, we all have some intuitive awareness of what a chair is. We can look at an object in the real world and say, that's a chair. That is chairy enough to be considered a chair. I don't think that the same understanding exists with consciousness as a concept. At least not for me. I don't have an intuition of consciousness. I can't look at an animal and immediately be able to pick up if it has consciousness or not. This is a convoluted term that gets lost in minutiae as soon as you try to look at it closely. An easy example of this would be to present a lot of animals and ask someone to elucidate which ones are and are not conscious. So I will go down this line. I want you to tell me which ones are conscious and which ones are not conscious. Human, dog, fish, shrimp, fly, amoeba, plant. Which ones are and are not conscious? I could lay out a bunch of chairs and point to them and say which ones are and aren't chairs. And if there's a bench, you would probably say that, well, that's more of a bench than a chair. But there's something missing in discussions of consciousness, right? It's much harder to draw a line than it is with other things that we interact with on a day-to-day basis. I think everyone would say that humans are conscious, and I would say most people would probably include smart animals, pigs, octopi, dolphins, dogs in that same kind of category. So by looking at the internal structure, at least the narrative that we have called the internal structure of these creatures' mind, and then comparing it to other animals on this list, I think we can draw some differences up and look at how that changes throughout the different animals. So certainly with humans, this is the easiest one to draw. We're all humans. We know what being a human feels like. We take in some sensory input, and then that's either processed by some innate reaction, like a low-level emotion or some autonomic body response, or we take it in as input and roll it around in our heads and think about it and contemplate it. We ruminate on it for a while, and some combination of these two components will lead to an action. I think most people would probably agree that fish, shrimp, and flies are all kind of in the same category of just having reactions. They take in sensory information and then they react to it. All of their output into the world is just reaction to sensory information that they get. And the final category would be single-celled organisms and plants. I think most people would agree that these beings are largely governed by biology, just straight up biology. They are programmed in a certain way, so they act in a certain way. And zooming out and comparing these, this is interesting because humans and arguably dogs and maybe fish are the only ones that have two different nodes. They have both a reaction component to them as well as a contemplation component to them. So the first conclusion that you might think about drawing from this is that the ability to contemplate, to think, to compare multiple pieces of information is what makes something conscious. However, this seems like a limited definition to me. I don't think that this is all that consciousness entails. In both the case of an individual instance of GPT-03 or a robot that is more embodied in this world and lives for a full day or a full week or a full year or however long, they both only have the ability to take in sensory information and contemplate it. They can only think about the information that they've been dealt. They don't have any internal sense of when to act innately, when to experience something innately, something that they're not fully in control of. All they can do is take in inputs and try to connect the inputs together in some way to create an output. This is very different from how humans act, right? We have some of our experiences mediated by like low-level autonomic or emotional components, and then a lot more of it we have the ability to look at and combine in novel ways. So I'd like to expand this a little more to see if we can get to a closer definition of consciousness using a robot or AI or whatever. What if the main thinking model is largely the same, kept intact? However, now, under certain conditions, this robot experiences in a much more instinctual way. There's just a long if-else clause handling very specific circumstances. And in these circumstances, the robot acts more instinctually. It doesn't have direct control deciding what it's going to do. An example you could use is a very specific circumstance that tells the robot innately just to yell at a person, yell loudly and angrily at a person that they're interacting with. I think you would ask them why they yelled, and they would say something like, I don't know, this is not my character, this is not who I am, something just came over me, and I yelled at this person, and that's not who I'm trying to be, that's not the personality that I'm trying to embody. I really don't know where that came from. That was another part of me that I don't have full control over. I think in that answer, there is a closer approximation to consciousness rather than the purely linear thinking strategy of the earlier example. And what that leads me to believe is that there is some necessity of having multiple parts kind of cross-talking or acting upon the same stimuli without connecting to each other, without having direct connection and conversation and communication between sub-units, sub-processing units. Lights turned off. If anyone knows why Wemo lights turn off randomly after changing the Wi-Fi, let me know. This is very annoying. I don't know why the lights are constantly turning off on me. Okay, we're back. It's a monster day. No more water. Water is out. Monster is in. Monster energy. The fact that we can come closer to approximating consciousness when multiple systems, multiple subunits are processing the same sensory information without directly communicating to different sub-processes is interesting to me. I think that is telling. If we build on this model a little more, make it a little bit more complex, and create almost a subconscious thinking unit for this robot. So now we have the main thinking node that we had previously. However, we now have a subcomponent. This subconscious unit doesn't do any of the actual thinking that we think of as thinking. All its job is to integrate past experience with present stimuli so that the main thinking model will have to do less computation about how an experience fits in with the rest of its life, I guess I will say. This is the filter, this is the worldview through which this main module will now see everything. And of course, to make it a little more complex, this filter needs to be updated throughout the lifespan of this robot, right? So we add another node whose only job is to update this filter, this coloring node, when new information is being expressed. And of course, we keep some of that machine code at the very top to handle what would be, to us, very simple, innate responses. I think if you brought this robot into a therapy session, if you sat it down and talked to it for any length of time, everyone would call this conscious. The way that this robot interacts with the world and talks about its experience and how some of its actions are not fully known to itself, and its worldview is colored in a certain way that it doesn't fully have access to, this starts to sound a lot like consciousness. And of course, it's not a perfect analog. I created a more complex example if you want to look at that. I'm not going to explain it. It's kind of slop in my opinion. So moving on from that, I think it's really telling that the more subunits there are, the more underlying processes there are, the closer we come to approximating consciousness. Isn't that neat? Isn't that really cool? I think that's very telling about what we think of as consciousness. We don't just want something that's capable of thought, something that's linearly minded and capable of rational thought processes. And we don't want something that's fully emotional, that all it knows how to do is react to stimuli and color it either positively or negatively. Neither one of these is fully embodying what we mean when we say something is conscious. However, the interaction between these two systems in a way that they cannot fully have access to each other makes something appear more alive, more human, more conscious. Okay, my microphone died, but we are back. Where was I? This video has been through several different iterations by this point. It has taken me a while to find a line between just continually deconstructing the idea of consciousness and trying to form something new up that keeps the good but kind of gets rid of the bad, or just explaining the process and some of the underlying fundamentals. I mean, really, this is probably my fifth attempt at finding some way to close out this thought process of mine. This is all to say, I think consciousness is a reasonable description of a phenomena. I think it's fair to describe some processes as conscious and other processes as not conscious. If I was to criticize this, I would say that there is an issue with saying that a creature is conscious or has consciousness. Saying that consciousness is a trait that belongs to something rather than an emergent property feels a little weird to me. I think it's a lot more descriptive to say that consciousness emerges out of interactions between different pieces of information or different forces. I think this makes it simpler to take a phenomena and analyze it and say, does this process contain consciousness within it as it presents right now, rather than like looking at a rabbit, looking at the lifespan of a rabbit, and not just a rabbit, but all rabbits, all rabbits that have ever existed, and asking the question of, are rabbits conscious? I think there's a big difference there. And this is now taking a broader view, saying that pieces of information interact with systems and some other information is spit out on the other side. I call this black box processing. Ultimately, we cannot know what happens inside of the box. We look at someone else and assume that they have a consistent experience, an experience of the world that's consistent with our own, but we don't know that. We can never say that. I think it's more valuable to say that there are things and the internals of the things cannot truly be known to us. But there is a phenomena of a thing taking in one form of information and producing some other form of information. Information here being like energy or matter, or if you believe in and some third thing. If you have some like metaphysical framework, then feel free to import that into this theory. And importantly, the qualities of the information that gets passed into the system is different from the qualities of the information that gets passed out of the system. For frequent viewers of my channel, I can relate this back to Goop. Goop as a kind of undifferentiated substrate that something can act upon and form into something. Goop can kind of become anything under the right circumstances. However, it will never become something on its own. It will always need some observer, some actor, to create something out of this goop. And I think this is a reasonable model for what people mean when they refer to something as conscious. There is stuff, there's stuff in the world, and then someone acts upon that stuff. And after that person has acted upon stuff, that stuff is now no longer the same as it was previously. In this way, a conscious being has exerted part of themselves upon some substrate in the outside world. A very simple example would be something like a bird seeing a stick. That stick is passed in as sensory information, and in this state, it's acting upon the bird. However, the bird also has some internal knowledge about nest, or some desire about nesting. And between the knowledge of the stick in the outside world and its predetermined knowledge of what it means to create a nest, it takes that stick and integrates it into a nest. Consciousness is taking something and involving it in process to create a new outcome of some sort. Another example of this that might be more personal to some viewers would be the creative act of making something new, of some event in your life triggering some emotion, and this emotion having a downstream consequence of creating thoughts that then get put into some process, and out comes a creation at the end. This interaction with an event and an individual, a conscious being, ultimately creates something new in the world. This is certainly not an all-encompassing perfect definition. I think it is more utilitarian than appealing to like a soul or neuronal firings in a certain way that create a knowledge of self. I will never know what it's like to be a bat, so I can never tell if a bat is conscious in this way. At least within this system, I can say a bat works in such a way to create something new in the world. And because of that, I choose to call this bat conscious. No matter how you ground this conversation, it's a narrative. It's a narrative that you tell about other things either way. And I think this is the better narrative to tell than appealing to some more nebulous internal state of a being that you will never be able to measure. Another analogous model that we could use to map conscious input and output is a wave-based model. Waves can only act as disturbances in some medium, so I need to ground this conversation a little more, and to do that I'm going to vaguely say that material reality is the substrate on which we're acting. It's basically the conscious ether. It's all around us, it can be perturbed in different ways, and these perturbances will ultimately end up interacting with other waves, other outcomes of different processes, and when these collide, they will have unique, novel interactions. So the input to the black box in this example would be some outside wave that gets propagated and enters into the kind of arbitrary lines that we decide an individual fits into. And within this individual, there are some sub-processes, as we've discussed earlier. There are some subunits of a person, of a conscious being, that are on their own creating their own output. Neurons are constantly firing. We are never fully silent in our own mind. Our mind is constantly self-reflecting and creating new ideas about the world and interacting in novel ways. So our brain is never truly quiet. In this way, we are constantly disturbing the medium around us. And as soon as some input is given to us, that now interacts with the pre-existing disturbances in the medium. And the interaction between these disturbances and our disturbances is a novel interaction, a new kind of propagation of the wave that didn't previously exist. And I'm a big fan of this model, not just because it's process-oriented, which I have been on a huge kick of for the past like 4 months or something, huge process fan, but also because it is not one thing acting upon the other necessarily. It is the integration of the two. It's the action of the two upon each other. And the outcome of that process is what consciousness is what the outcome of consciousness is. It's not some internal, highly individual process that belongs to a person, but it's the interaction between that person, between that individual, between that conscious thing, and something that's being given to them from the outside world. I like this model for another reason, because it's very visual, and I think it's able to aptly express some intuitions about how to live. One very simple example of this would be the value of engagement. In short, the more that you are willing to engage with a system, the more personal energy that you're willing to put into a system, the more you will ultimately get out of it in the end. If you show up to school or something like that, completely not caring about what's going to happen that day, then you're not going to get much out of it. However, if you go in expecting to get at least one piece of information, then you'll be more vigilant and looking out for more pieces of information, more goop that you can pick up on and alter in your own head. I think this is easily expressible by looking at the outcome of the waves from this different system. If you, the internal nodes within this system, are creating less field distortions, you cannot fully rely on the inputs to the system to do all the work for you. You have to engage a little bit. You have to be willing to bounce around a little more, create some more connections, alter the medium a little more, and create some waves. Returning now to the question of if a robot would be properly conscious, I think this model gives a description as to why a lot of people feel kind of intuitively like that's not the case. I think an LLM, no matter how much it thinks, is only really given inputs. It has no substrate on which it can act. It has some rules about how to do logic, how to make connections, how to do a lot of very complex math on pieces of information to weave them together in a certain way. An LLM only knows how to deal with inputs, though. It itself does not have these internal nodes that create disturbances within this medium. It knows how to take a bunch of information and process it in a certain way to create an output. Now, this output very frequently looks like some wave disturbance that would be created by a human person. But really, the interaction between external and internal is not there. It's only external. It's only external information acting upon other pieces of external information. The model knows how to weight information very well, how to make connections very cleanly, but it doesn't know how to individually act upon those pieces of information. So while you may get a very clean, objectively correct, maybe even artistic output, you're not going to have the same field disturbances that happen within the system. And of course, we only know this because we know how LLMs work. We have programmed LLMs, and even if we don't know the individual subprocesses, we have a solid understanding. So our rule of only looking at the input and output here and treating the rest of it as a black box is a little disturbed here. This is an individual instance where we actually do know some of the parts within the black box. So we are able to take a closer look at what is happening inside to draw our conclusions. And even if that's not correct, that's the narrative that we tell. We tell the narrative that these LLMs are just connecting pieces of information. They're just weaving information together, but they're not really acting on them as an individual would. And if this is the narrative that we choose to go with, then this is the outcome that we get, which is that this thing is not conscious. If we created a system that had seemingly internal preferences and really individual attitudes towards the world, even if it didn't, if that was the narrative that we chose to go with, then we would get the outcome of it being conscious. So ultimately, in short, consciousness is kind of incoherent, no matter how you cut it. But you have to cut it some way. I went through multiple iterations of not cutting it, and I either ended up with a conclusion that nothing is consciousness, consciousness does not exist, or that like lasers interacting with the lens on the laser is consciousness. And I don't think that either one of these properly describes the underlying intuition that a lot of people have. We agree that there is a consciousness, so who am I to say that consciousness doesn't exist or that consciousness is so proliferated that it doesn't matter? If we say that some things are conscious and other things are not conscious, then we should work at least somewhat within that system, I think. If enough people are saying it, then there's some quality that people are picking up on, and you can alter and stretch that quality, but just breaking it down endlessly will not do much good. And this is more a statement to myself. Me talking to the camera here is saying this back to me, because this was a grueling process of trying to figure out the limits of consciousness and the limits of this project, where I should choose to continue going and where I should just draw a line and say, consciousness exists. Just pretend like consciousness exists. And this is maybe a larger problem that I want to make a video on, but it's very easy to fall into this deconstructive hole of breaking a process down into parts, into parts, into parts. You just spiral into nothingness. So if you can get to the bottom of something and it feels at least somewhat intuitive to you, then I think that's a reasonable guideline for where to stop, where to aim for, and also where to stop. Because ultimately, everything is a social construct. Everything is a narrative that we tell in one way or another. There's always going to be untruths and faults within the system. However, I think it's valuable to have reality, frankly. I'm going to say it. It's not going to be popular, but reality is good. I like reality. I like operating within a system that we all agree is the basis that we can build off of. And if there are things that exist within reality, then I should try to engage with it. I should try to reshape those into such a way that it is meaningful to me, but I should not just go out and try to destroy and take down those qualities if they are meaningful to other people. Try to engage with the system. If you engage with the system, then you will ultimately get more out of it on the other side. This video is a little less coherent than some of my others. It's a lot more sporadic. I don't have as clear-cut a final conclusion or takeaway to this. The internals are less structured than some of my digitization videos, and my opinions towards my own opinions are much less strong. I have much less ties to this than I do with my process video. However, I think that this is a reasonable starting point, and I think it needles in on some interesting points about consciousness that hopefully either I in the future or outside people can pick up on and manipulate in ways that they see fit. This is another one of my videos that I hope contains a couple of points of goop in it where people can pick up on and build off of in the future. But the thing as a whole, it's certainly not goop. There are going to be sloppy elements in this video. Regardless, I appreciate everyone watching and commenting and emailing me massively. My channel has grown twice as large again since the last time I uploaded, which is insane growth. And in the description of this video, if I go through with this, I will very likely have some Patreon with probably everything being free, but some place for me to upload my files. I know at least one person has asked me for my files of just my drawings, and maybe some of the more miscellaneous parts of these videos. I don't expect it to have any pay model. I don't think you should be giving me money for this. That seems insane that I would be making money off of these videos. But yeah, go check that out if you're interested in any of the sub-components of this. I might upload some of my some videos of me rambling there as well too. I'm not fully sure yet. That's a work in progress. But anyways, regardless, I will stop rambling now. Happy New Year. Enjoy whatever process you're currently engaged in, and go will your consciousness into existence. Go create something. Go interact with some forces in the outside world. Go be a conscious thing, because I am relatively sure all of you have consciousness. So with that, thank you. I will see you again soon.